Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the final session of this year's Straight Talk series, Media and Politics in a Post-Truth Era. I'm Nancy Kennedy, and I'm the director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute here at Furman University. We are thrilled to work each year with the Riley Institute to put this series together. This is our 7th year, and it's been a very successful partnership. The Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, which is also known as OLLI, provides courses, programs, travel opportunities, and social events, and a lot more to retired people in our community. Last year, more than 2,200 senior adults came to Furman University for an OLLI course. Whether for a history course, a hiking expedition, or a cooking class, OLLI members come to Furman to learn just for the fun of it. Our lifelong learners set a great example for all of us. Through the Straight Talk series, we're able to offer another opportunity for all of us to learn. Each summer, we focus on a critical issue facing our community, our state, or even our nation. I hope you've enjoyed this summer series and that you leave here tonight with new information that will help you be a better consumer of the news. I'd like to thank especially Jill Fusen at the Riley Institute for all of her work in putting this program together. She finds the speakers and sets the agendas and just does an amazing job of assembling these programs, and I'd like to thank her. I'd also like to ask you to take anything that beeps or rings or makes any kind of noise and put it on silent so that our speakers are not interrupted tonight. Thank you for doing that. And then I'd like to recognize Dr. Danielle Vinson, who is professor of political science here at Furman. She's been the moderator for this series, and she's done an excellent job of guiding us all through this topic. As she comes to the stage to start the night's program, I hope you'll all give her a hand.
Thank you. Tonight, as we have in previous weeks, we're going to give you the opportunity to ask questions. If you'll take your program, turn to the back, and right where it says Audience Q&A, pull out your reading glasses. In tiny print under that, you will find the number to text your questions to. Please do include your name. We like to know who's asking the questions. Our topic tonight is winning the information war. Where do we go from here? To explain where here is, I want to begin by recapping where we've been the last 2 weeks and commend you on your bravery in returning this week. Some of what we've learned has been downright scary. On week 1, Jason Tance helped us understand why we are often easy prey for fake news. We like information that confirms our existing biases, so we accept it even when it may be too good or bad to be true. And we are much more likely to react to information that makes us mad or scared. So websites and media that want clicks and viewers play to those emotions, opening the door to misinformation. Jonathan Albright scared the daylights out of us by explaining how information spreads and selects us based on our reactions to what we encounter online. I will not ask for a show of hands of how many of you are now thinking twice before you click that like button on comments or tweets or posts. Personally, I'm happy to finally have a legitimate reason not to be on Facebook. Instead of having to admit I'm antisocial or simply lazy, I can now self-righteously proclaim that I am protecting myself from micro-targeting and algorithms choosing my media based on my Facebook profile. Those of you looking for an excuse, you've got it. Last week, Chuck Todd pulled out the war metaphors and talked about how fake news sites, partisan media, and some political operatives have weaponized information. We now battle over facts and alternative facts, often turning cultural differences and experiences into ideological or partisan battles that contribute to the misinformation we must wade through to find reality. But while our path over the last 2 weeks has taken us to some dark places, we've also seen some glimmers of hope. Mike Oreskes argued in week 1 that we're not in a post-truth era, and that citizens and journalists can demand accurate reporting in ways that the media will respond to. We saw Bob Inglis follow up last week by proclaiming that politicians can't just make stuff up. That is refreshing. We heard Chuck Todd and Catrice Hardy talk about the role the media play in holding people accountable for the things they say and the information they spread, and yes, the things they just make up. Each week, we've gotten questions from you about what citizens can do to inform themselves and to equip themselves to distinguish real news from fake news. Tonight, I'm happy to report I think you're going to get a few answers to those questions. We begin this evening with Alexios Manzarlis, and I did not pronounce that correctly, I am sure. He is the director of the Poynter Institute's International Fact-Checking Network. For those who are not familiar with the Poynter Institute, it's a global leader in journalism, and in 2016 alone, it trained journalists from 126 countries and forged training partnerships with more than 20 major media organizations, including Gannett, Google, National Geographic, and Univision. As director of Poynter's International Fact-Checking Network, Alexios writes about and advocates for fact-checking and trains and convenes fact-checkers globally. He's helped draft the Fact Checkers Code of Principles. He's shepherded a partnership between third-party fact checkers and Facebook. He's testified to the Italian Chamber of Deputies on the fake news phenomenon and helped launch International Fact-Checking Day. Alexios, we look forward to hearing from you.
All right. How are we doing? Good. Great. Wonderful. I am here to spend some time with you guys to answer this question. Do facts still matter? And it's quite a remarkable question, I think, to have to ask, but this is 2017. I will not bury my lead. I will not keep you guessing on my own preconceptions and opinions. I very much love the facts. I am a partisan of the facts. I love everything about them. But as you have seen, those of you who have seen the first two series of these talks, they are under attack. It is not a great moment for them. Last week, this post that you're seeing up there claiming that Hurricane Irma was going to go straight through the Caribbean and then through the Gulf of Mexico to hit Houston again after the city was walloped by Hurricane Harvey, was shared tens of thousands of times, reaching an audience several times larger than that. Of course, this was a fake. As many of you who follow the news know, Irma is now headed towards my neck of the woods in Florida. But as a citizen of Houston looking to social media for the latest news, this scared a lot of people. It led to the National Weather Service reminding everyone that they only do advisories 5 days at a time. The post you were seeing before was a 10-day forecast. But of course, the corrective tweet reached far fewer people than the original misinformation, and this is a challenge we need to talk about. But it is not just that our internet platforms are too permeable to misinformation that should worry us. Our general knowledge of the basic facts on which our society makes big decisions, take immigration, are often way off the mark. This is a poll that's a few years old, but I can assure you that it would look not very different if we did it again. When asked, Italians were asked, what percentage of the population of your country is immigrant? The average guess was 30%. The real number was 7%. In these United States, the average guess was 32%. The real number was 13%, and so on. When we make decisions on facts that aren't facts, democracy suffers. So are we therefore here to bury the facts, to proclaim what sloppy commentators have determined is the post-truth era? I venture to say no, and I hope to use the rest of the time to tell you why. But first, I would ask you to be with me to hang along to two ideas together at the same time. They may sound conflicting, but they are not. First, we know that fact-checking faces big challenges. We know that correcting people is hard. You heard from Danielle and from previous speakers that there are problems to spreading factual information. But at the same time, it is preposterous to suggest that suddenly facts don't matter anymore, that they matter any less than they once mattered. And here, I hope, is some evidence for it. For one, fact-checking is booming around the world. This photo was taken from the Global Fact-Checking Summit that my organization holds in Madrid in June. There were 188 journalists from 53 countries, in a sign that more and more the media is seeing its role not as making the news, but as helping you, the news consumer, sort through the news and verify and understand what is fact and what is fiction. And the audiences are lapping it up. Snopes, which some of you may know, is a 20-year-old hoax-busting site which started with looking at mails that some crazy relative would send you, was in a property struggle earlier this year, and so the team that actually runs the site was cut off from the ad revenue, so it turned to its audience to ask for support. It asked for $500,000 to pay the salaries for a few months. It got, within 6 days, almost $700,000. People are ready to pay for the truth. People are turning to fact-checking sites. PolitiFact.com last year, a fact-checking website that won the Pulitzer in 2009, obtained 110 million page views. These, I can tell you as someone who looks at fact-checking websites, are a lot of page views. And maybe more important than this anecdotal evidence, we are seeing that citizens expect this from the media. When you ask them what should the media be doing, they say they want the media to help them fact-check, to verify the news. And so those of you who have heard the post-truth trope, the meme that suddenly facts don't matter anymore, may have seen it anchored in this phenomenon called the backfire effect. Anyone here heard the backfire effect? A few nodding heads? Maybe not. When I explain it to you, maybe you'll recognize it. It's the study in 2006 that found that when you correct people, the example was weapons of mass destruction, not only do they not change their minds, they become even more obstinately in favor of that thing. So instead of going towards the truth, by correcting, you make it worse. This study, however, was replicated last year, and across the spectrum, Ethan Porter and Thomas Wood at Ohio State University and George Washington University asked 36 different factual claims, corrected them, and across the board for 8,100 respondents, every curve, every partisan preference, everyone moved from a more incorrect position to a more correct position. We will see that there is resistance, right? That not everyone moved, and we will see that it is influenced by your partisan preferences. But we are not immune to facts. We are not resistant to facts. All right, so what's next? I think, as I mentioned, fact-checking does need to change, does need to adapt. There are ways we can make facts matter more, and we should. Here are a few ideas, and maybe we can talk about them more in the panel and the Q&A. First of all, they need to be working with the platforms. Facebook and Google are the primary way in which a large chunk of the population obtains their information. And so fact-checkers are partnering with Facebook. Danielle mentioned it. Some of you may have seen on your newsfeed pop up this red flag when stories that have been flagged as fake by third-party fact-checkers appear in your newsfeed. It will say, you know, such and such organization has fact-checked it and found it false. You can click through to see the facts there. It doesn't remove it from the information ecosystem, which is important, right? But it does annotate it. Platforms doesn't only mean Facebook. We are a little obsessed with Facebook, and for good reason. But let's remember that Google is a primary way in which people obtain information that is central to their everyday life. What medicine should I take? What is this ailment that I have? My wife is pregnant, so can she eat this thing while she's pregnant? And inevitably, when you Google it, the top result is no, she can't eat it. It will kill the baby. It will kill her. It will kill the father. It will kill everyone around us. This is a fundamental aspect of our information ecosystem, and we cannot afford for the internet, which is a resource and a precious one, to become so polluted with faulty information, to become structured in such a way that does not allow accurate information to surface, for this incredible resource to go wasted. Fact checkers are working with Google. You will notice with some results that there's an additional tag on fact checks that will tell you when something was claimed and what was found to be true or false. But this is just a start. Fact checking can and should work on automation. Part of the problem is that a lie is very easy to publish and a fact check is sometimes very hard to follow up on. And so we need to accelerate and reduce the time to market between the hoax and the correction. And automation can help us do that. I know this, AI sounds like an odd thing. I'm not suggesting robotic fact checkers anytime. What I'm talking about, for instance, is if a claim appears somewhere on the internet that has already been corrected somewhere else, and this happens all the time with breaking news, then it should be much more easy to pair the hoax with the correction. Finally, almost finally, fact checkers need to go into the classroom and help the digitally native not be digitally naive and understand what the weight of their production on social media is on the overall quality of accuracy online. They're doing this through International Fact Checking Day. We reached almost 100,000 students with our classroom pack. And then last but not least, fact checkers need to be measuring their impact. So we have this continuous experiment whereby we offer factual corrections to the public and or try to correct political claims. We should be measuring much more closely what works, what doesn't work, what do people trust, why do they trust it, what kind of fact-checking works. And so these are, I think, some of the vectors that we should go down and explore more. I'm just going to wrap up by reminding you that facts matter. They are why we are sat on our chairs in here. They are why we're here tonight. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Erica Hobbes. She's the Communications Director and Program Manager for the News Literacy Project, where she also oversees classroom programs. She's written for the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Center for Public Integrity, and the Baltimore Sun. She's also spent 5 years at the Orlando Sentinel, where she covered the nation's 10th largest school district. She's going to tell us more about the News Literacy Project and the importance of helping young people become discerning consumers of news. Erica.
Good evening. So I have my cell phone, and I want to tell you what I tell my yoga students, and that's I'm not checking my texts. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we think is one of the solutions to the idea of, or the phenomenon of fake news. So I'm with the News Literacy Project. Has anybody ever heard of us before? Excellent. I didn't when I applied to the News Literacy Project, but what we are is we're strictly nonpartisan, nonprofit, and we teach kids how to tell fact from fiction from whatever they're reading online. We do that in a couple different ways, which I'll talk about in just a second. I can't really see this. So in the beginning, I'm going to come over here. I'm sorry. This is our first 8 years, so we're about 9 years old. We can't hear you. Oh, let's go back. All right. Now I'm going to talk fast because I want to get to the fun part. Okay, so in the beginning, we're 9 years old. In the beginning, we thought we were doing a fantastic job, right? So we would send people into the classroom, and like me, and we would teach our curriculum, and we'd train teachers how to use our curriculum, and we'd provide resources. And in the first 8 years, we reached about 25,000 students. We partnered and still partner with about 400 journalists who do classroom visits in person and virtually, and we taught a whole bunch of lessons. Then, last year happened. So, 3 things happened for us. Number 1, the election. Number 2, a study I'll talk to you about in just a second. And number 3, we took all of our lessons and we put them online in a really cool product called the Checkology Virtual Classroom. And as you can see, our growth, we grew exponentially. We thought at this time we would be in about half of the states in the United States. And as you can see, we have a global reach. We work with almost 8,000 teachers who reach a little more than 1 million students, and we're in 64 countries. Here are some of the countries that we're in, and as you can tell, Russia is not on there. Don't know why, but these are brand new stats, and we'll be looking into this so we can explain the phenomena a little bit more. So why now? Why are we talking about this now? And it's because, honestly, news and information literacy is one of the most important skills for survival in the 21st century. Teachers tell you this, employers tell you this, but it's true. It doesn't affect you necessarily or always on a financial level, but it affects students and affects us on every facet of our daily lives. And one of the things that changed, as I said before, happened last year. So the Stanford-Harvard education group studied middle school students. Now, we all as adults assumed that middle school students, because they're digital natives, had it down cold, that they could figure out what they're reading, they understood the difference between fact and fiction, and it turns out that we were absolutely wrong. So 82% of the students that they studied could not figure out what was credible and what was not on, basically it was their cell phones. And they didn't know how to tell. So if they were asked why they thought something was true, they would say because there was a picture attached or because it was a long article, right? So seriously, so last year, it sent a shockwave in the industry into news and media literacy watchers. And then so we were concerned, and everybody's concerned, and that's why, right? I talked about how information literacy affects everybody on their daily lives, and that's because information, and right now we're all grappling with a fire hose of information, right? Information leads to decisions, and decisions lead to actions. And those actions can be clicks, they can be likes, they can be enroll, they could be buy, and they could be vote. So here's what we teach. We now have the Checkology Virtual Classroom. It is a series of 12 core lessons broken up into 4 modules that's completely flexible for teachers, and it's designed to provide students and teachers a blended learning experience. We talk about the basics, so things like what is news, what's newsworthy, what does that mean? We talk about news judgment. We talk about the watchdog role of a press in a democracy. First Amendment is a big deal to us, and we try to spread that around. We talk a lot about bias and confirmation bias. We talk about viral content, and not only just teaching what it is, but teaching about the motivations for the creation of it and for the and why we fall for it too. We talk about some other cool things too that a lot of people aren't necessarily teaching right now, and so that would be algorithms, as someone mentioned earlier. And we also teach students about branded content. Branded content, it's an advertising that's disguised to look like news, right? Hard to figure out what that is. And then we do that through the Checkology Virtual Classroom. Now, here's why we kind of think that it works. So we're all about rigorous assessment. And from the start, our founder has made sure that we were able to say that our program worked and why. Now, obviously, there was a growth in knowledge, because if you go in not knowing something and then you learn about it, you're going to come away knowing about it, right? But our students are self-reporting changes in attitudes and behaviors. And so for communications majors, you might know that that's very, very, very difficult to do. But our students are reporting after that they take our core unit that they are more skeptical, they are more apt to look for information, and not just any kind of information, but credible information. And they also report that they're more likely to vote when they're old enough to do so. We think that's pretty cool. So, what does this look like? And this is where you come in. So I am going to show you a little bit about what we teach our students, and you get to be the editor. We've got a few minutes to do this. So give me 1 second and let me log on over here. So you can see this is the beginning lesson of Checkology. This is module 1. We talk about, maybe I can move this. Okay. So this is like the introductory thing. So you talk about an introduction to what Checkology is. We teach about different types of information. We find that students don't really know what raw information is, and that takes a little while to kind of sink in. And then we talk about what is news, where we teach students about news judgment and newsworthiness. And then they synthesize that through an activity that we're going to go through together. Oh, I got logged out. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Okay, let me. You will. Talk about online safety. All right, here we go. And let me get rid of this. So you are all the editor for a newspaper. It's called The Signal. And you are in charge of publishing the homepage for that day. You're selecting the stories for the homepage that day, and you are going to be publishing it. So you're going to be looking at what's called, oops, gotta go over here, a news budget. And this is the kind of thing that editors and reporters, but mostly editors, look at every single day. So they do look at what's going on, and they make the determination in part based on what they're seeing. Analytics play a role, but we're not going to talk about that right now. So we're going to build your homepage. I'm going to show you an abbreviated version of this. And I know you're all reading this, but while you're thinking a little bit, I'm going to read some of them to you. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose the top 5 news stories that you would publish on your homepage. And we're going to take just a few minutes to do that. So I will talk while you think. So we've got students at William Harrison High School are hospitalized with possible food poisoning. Here's a hint. You would click on this and read it. We're not going to do that now. And that would tell you it happened last week. There's an investigation. The mayor received campaign contributions from donors linked to organized crime, which sounds like my hometown in Chicago. And census report shows Hispanics continue to be the fastest growing group in the US. There's a major storm system that's threatening the region. We've got 130 refugees believed dead in a ferry accident in the Mediterranean. A grand jury declines to indict an officer in the death of an unarmed teen. And we've got a study that suggests an herbal supplement used in Chinese medicine may help treat cancer. And we've got a 3-time Grammy Award-winning singer who's arrested in Tennessee. And 2 more, we've got a warehouse accident that kills 5 local workers, and then a middle school student who raises $7,000 to fight with hunger. All right, time's up, because remember, in news, there's always a deadline. Does somebody want to pick the first story? Storm. Okay. Second story. Mayor indicts. Which one is the student? The one where they're sick? Yeah? Okay. No. Oh. Which one? Oops. Warehouse. I hear warehouse a whole lot. 2 more. Now the middle school students? Grand jury. Last one, there's only 5. All right, we'll do the middle school one. Which one? This one. Bottom, that one. Oh, the happy story, yeah. All right, we're good? Everybody agrees? See? We can't duke it out right now, but uh-oh, breaking news. Because that never happens. Here's where it is. We got to go back. We got to see what it is. And it's a hacker has just disrupted a United Nations session. Does that change your mind at all? Show of hands. Who thinks we need to bump one of the stories and put that UN story up? Who thinks we're fine and we can just go? I think we got to bump it. Okay. So which one should we bump? There. Which one do we bump? The happy story. All right. Whoa. That was pretty, I don't know. All right, I'll let you guys, we're going to move on. So here we go. Breaking news. Get ready. Time is up. We've got to publish. You've got circulation and advertising that's dependent on this. Put the happy story back in. All right, so this is the order. Is this the order that you want? What should be the top story? Major storm. Second one. Grand jury. Hacker goes where? I think there's some 2s. Okay, so 3s, I think we're okay there. What about 4 and 5? They look good? So here we go. They're building our page. Ta-da. Here's your news story. Here's your home page. So what everyone is going to see first is the information about the storm. Second will be the breaking. And then third is the grand jury. And then off on the side in other news, you've got the other interesting stories that people are going to have to click through to find. Are you happy with these options? You're happy with how it came out? Yeah? What were the other 2? That's the investigations. That was the mayor received the campaign contributions from the mob. And then the middle school students raised $7,000 to fight hunger. So I just want to let you know that I ran through this. I've done this with high school students. And I ran through it with 2 classes at Furman today. Every single one was vastly different. They say some funny stuff. So I just wanted to point out what these decisions are like. So one group of young men who were sitting over here were thought they had it, right? They thought they were really cool. They got through it really fast. And then I heard one of them go, "Whoa, we just picked all the crime stories." Right? And so they had to go back and think about this a little bit. And what 3 students told me today that they walked away with was an appreciation for, not for what journalists and editors go through, right? But they also said that they had no idea what it felt like to have the power of information in their hands to disseminate to a whole bunch of other people. So now if we were in the classroom, we would talk about the criteria for choosing these stories. We would talk about a whole bunch of other things, but we're not going to get into all of that right now. But as you can see, this is what our students experience throughout Checkology, and we're hoping to bring that to the students of South Carolina and to Russia and to whoever else that we can, so that we can start we can start young with the students to teach them the critical thinking skills that they need to survive in the 21st century. Thanks.
Thank you, Erica. Our next speaker is Charles Bierbauer, who spent more than 30 years as a journalist covering 5 presidential campaigns during his 20 years as a CNN political correspondent and reporting as Moscow and then Bonn bureau chief as an ABC News foreign correspondent. He's a professor in the University of South Carolina School of Journalism and Mass Communications, where he served as dean from 2002 until just this past July. He will talk to us about the role of journalists in restoring trust in journalism. Charles.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you to Furman and the Riley Institute and Secretary Riley. Always good to see you, and all of you people who answer to the name of Ollie. This title that Danielle just actually gave me a couple weeks ago, the role of journalists in restoring trust. That's a daunting assignment. It feels like a 12-step program. Hi, my name is Charles. I'm a journalist. And I'm an unrepentant journalist, willing to be improved, probably not reformed, and certainly not converted to some other doctrinal approach than what we have here, even though it's far from perfect. A journalist I am by training, by profession, and by inclination, in other words, an imperfection. I am not, however, the enemy of the people. New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof wrote recently, if only President Trump denounced neo-Nazis as passionately and sincerely as he castigates journalists. Kristof continued, we in journalism deserve to have our feet held to the fire. We make mistakes all the time, and too often we are superficial, sensationalist, unfair, defensive, or diverted by shiny objects. That doesn't make us bad people or bad citizens. Carl Bernstein at the White House Correspondents Association dinner earlier this year described journalism as the best obtainable version of the truth. It's also been called the first draft of history. One challenge for me as the last speaker in this series is that so many of the great quotes about the media have already been used. We've heard from James Madison, Ben Franklin, Dwight Eisenhower, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and even Mike Pence. Now, I'm not taking a partisan position here, but we are in a milieu where we are under siege as journalists, and I would suggest as consumers of the media from the administration currently in office. I would have cited Senator Moynihan as well when he suggests that you are entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. I might have rephrased it somewhat that says, no, that does not include alternative facts. A fact is a fact. Yet there are selective facts, and there are facts of the moment, and those don't always stand the test of time. One example I frequently use, because I anchored the coverage for CNN, was the bombing at the Atlanta Olympics back in 1996. You may recall that a bomb exploded during a concert at Centennial Park, which happens to be across the street from the CNN headquarters in Atlanta. No one knew what this might portend. Was it terrorism? Was it just the first of many more? What else was coming? The bomb was in a backpack, spotted by a security guard. His name was Richard Jewell. He had sounded the alarm that probably saved a number of lives. But in the following weeks, law enforcement, including the FBI, considered Jewell a suspect. So when officials told the media that, what did the media do? We reported it. Law enforcement officials tell CNN security guard Richard Jewell is a suspect in the bombing. Fact? Truth? Factual in recounting exactly what the media had been told by seemingly credible and knowing law enforcement officials. Truth of the moment, yes, but over time the trail led away from Richard Jewell. But not until after he had been besieged by the media circus of satellite trucks outside his town home. Jewell sued several news organizations, won a sizable amount of money in those judgments, but his life was substantially ruined. The man who put the bomb at Olympic Park, and another at an abortion clinic, and another at a gay bar, was Eric Rudolph, who was not captured until 7 years later. The facts were slow to accumulate. The truth evolved over time. So what's a journalist to do? And what are we being asked to restore trust in? Ourselves, journalism itself, our system, free enterprise, the Constitution that bestows upon us the right to a free press? That constitutional guarantee encompasses a partisan press. Doesn't say anything about that in Article 1 of the Constitution, and it makes no mention of bias, though we do get to slander and libel later on in the process. Let's be honest. Ben Franklin engaged in a little bit of fake news from time to time. In a different age, Tom Paine would have been a blogger. Paul Revere could have gotten off his horse and tweeted, "The British are coming, the British are coming." You can get 6 of those into one tweet. Solutions are easy to enunciate and difficult to implement. This 3-week seminar is replete with possibilities. I'm reluctant to say prescriptions. I'm not sure we should prescribe. Just as we come to the situation from different perspectives, we may see different solutions to this. Some may not even see a need for a solution. But I take your presence here as evidence that you are more civic than cynic. Erica and Alexis have offered 2 steps in this process. Fact-checking for journalists. If it's not accurate, don't write it. If the dots don't connect, it's not a story. Ask Dan Rather. There's an old aphorism among journalists that says, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Now, readers, listeners, viewers, you have a responsibility too. If it doesn't sound right, check it out. Try factcheck.org or Snopes, as Alexius pointed out. The Washington Post awards Pinocchios, and PolitiFact uses the evocative liar, liar, pants on fire. If you don't believe the media, check us out. I covered the Reagan White House for CNN, and in 4 successive years, President Reagan held summit meetings with the Soviet Union's Mikhail Gorbachev. As they walked the precarious line of nuclear disarmament, someone had armed Reagan with a short Russian saying, "Doveryai no proveryai," which means trust, but verify. As an actor, Ronald Reagan knew a good line when he heard it. "Doveryai no proveryai," he would say. And at the Washington summit, Gorbachev responded, "Вы всегда это говорите," you always say that. And Reagan said, "I like the sound of it." And I think you should too. Trust, but verify. Our other tool is media literacy, and I was very pleased to see Erica's presentation because I know Alan Miller and I know what he's put into getting this started. The News Literacy Project is a great example. Its primary target, as was pointed out, is middle school and high school, and that is not too soon to start trying to get people educated. Literacy is multifaceted. At the University of South Carolina, in our School of Library and Information Science, which was part of our college, we spent a lot of time on first children's literacy, and then we've added elements of family literacy that address things like nutrition and health and financial literacy so that the family is as much engaged as is the young child. The nature of our business, though, has changed so much. There are 2 tectonic shifts, I would suggest, that have led us to today's question. One is technological, and the other is economic. Both have been contemplated in different ways during this series. The technology that has fractured and multiplied the information marketplace, all the devices that we have at hand and the breadth of the internet, is at the same time responsible for the economic aftershock. When I was growing up, there were a morning and afternoon newspaper in the Pennsylvania town where I lived. I delivered both of those. We had 3 television networks, perhaps a half a dozen radio stations. I was the weekend newsman at one of those radio stations when I was in college. And then this media spectrum exploded. We got cable, and we got satellites, and we got the internet, and we got digital telephony, that all that involves. We've all been caught up in the pursuit of that next bright, shiny object. And spending accordingly, I would point out. Have you checked your cable bill or your satellite bill lately? Phones are pushing the $1,000 mark. Want that unlimited data plan? Don't we all? Newspapers. The Greenville News is a good paper. I'm sure you wouldn't be without it. It's got a paywall, and it should. Gannett's not a charity. We know that newspapers especially are struggling. That doesn't mean they aren't still making money. They're just not printing it anymore, as we used to say. The New York Times this week noted that it is looking for philanthropic funding. Investigative journalism across the country has fortunately benefited from a number of foundations who believe in investigative journalism. Does it come with a string, though? Is there a lean? Is there a tilt? Is there a hint of direction that comes with that money? Public media are on the chopping block. In Washington, funds for public broadcasting are never a sure thing. In Columbia, the legislature has not exactly been generous with SCETV. I should disclose, I do a public affairs show for ETV called This Week in South Carolina. And we like having some of that funding that comes that keeps us on the air. It's on Friday nights at 7:30. We will be talking about the nuclear plant fiasco. That's my plug. Watch tomorrow night, 7:30. What more might we do? I have a few suggestions. When I worked in Washington, I used to say that I was not ready for some smart aleck 25-year-old to take my position. Now my job is to train the smart aleck 25-year-olds. Among my student, one recent 25-something graduate is Politico White House reporter Josh Dawsey. In your own market, Jenny Knight produces the 6 o'clock news at WYFF. Over in Spartanburg, Christine Scarpelli reports for WSPA. These are some of the recent graduates that I've had the fortune of working with because they're bright, they're inquisitive, they're intuitive, they're dedicated, and they really think that journalism jobs are good jobs because they matter, and they matter in their communities. I'm concerned about communities. I'm concerned about local reporting, Nigel, because I'm not sure that we are doing the absolute best service that we could. And this little exercise here, when you have to select out of a menu of 10 and you've only got room for 5, what doesn't make the cut? Those are the kinds of things that we have to be alert to, keen to, and ask ourselves, what are we missing, and are the media doing the best possible job for us? Print newspapers have an outmoded financial model. I'm generalizing, but ad revenue is nearly obliterated. Online advertising growth lags. Circulation revenue is off. Paywalls for online content are still marginal. They're not producing the kind of revenue people wanted. So how do you do a good job when you don't have the revenues to hire the people that it takes to get out and cover? You've got maybe half a dozen reporters at your station. A newspaper may have a dozen these days if they're lucky. Used to be that you had scores in a newsroom, and that just doesn't exist anymore. What troubles me especially, though, is the content on local media. I watch news shows in both the Columbia and here in the upstate market. Yours is a difficult and an unusual television market. Television markets are designated by the demographic area, and yours stretches from Anderson to Asheville, although maybe it's Asheville to Anderson this way. That's unusual. Even your weather forecasts don't match from one end of the market to the other end of the market, and it makes it hard for a station here in Greenville to know what's going on in Asheville, even though you may have a reporter there. The weather, I note, has now become a Category 5 conspiracy, at least in Rush Limbaugh's view. Can I get an extra 30 seconds? I just added this afternoon. When I started, Rush Limbaugh said, and it seems so apt, these storms, once they actually hit, are never as strong as they're reported, he claimed. The graphics that have been created to make it look like the ocean's having an exorcism, just getting rid of the devil here in the form of the hurricane. And he goes on, he doesn't quite call it fake weather, but he suggests that the reporting is a conspiracy between the media and the merchants. You know, sell more flashlights, more batteries, more milk, more bread, more scotch, whatever. Beyond the weather, and the weather is one of the things that draws all of us to the media. We may not care about sports. We may not care about even the middle schooler who's raised $7,000, but we care about the weather. It's one of the things, and Nigel knows this, that is most important because it's where we get it most directly and most immediately. As a reporter in Philadelphia in the 1970s at KYW, I lamented once in a note which I thumbtacked to the bulletin boards that I was tired of covering murders in North Philly, fires in South Philly, and car wrecks in Camden, that there must be more to what we were doing than just those relatively easy, forgive me, things that affected some people but had no impact whatsoever in the suburb where my family lived. And that we're not getting into City Hall, we're not getting into the state legislature, we're not getting into school board meetings. Sure, they're tedious, but we need to spend more times in those places. We are seduced by the flashing lights and the yellow police tape. I had an assistant. I had an assistant news director at that station in Philadelphia who was much more enamored of what he saw than what he might have learned. And so he would say things like, do we see flames? And could you get the news truck in the story, work a shot of the truck at the scene, preferably in the first 20 seconds of your story as a promotion? We shouldn't do that stuff. That's not reporting. There's a place for promotion. And yes, we've got to sell this stuff. Washington Post columnist Ann Applebaum wrote the other day about reporting from Houston during the hurricane and flooding. Just two brief sentences, what she wrote. Even from afar, it was clear that local journalists were leading the effort to inform people on the ground, explaining how to get rescued, where to go, what to do. What if they hadn't been there? And then she continued, the weakness of local news means that important decisions, whether on zoning and school boards, are made in a vacuum. The absence of local debate is, in turn, one of the factors that contribute to Americans' sense of disconnection from politics, for their mistrust of one another, even for their alarming, well-documented, declining faith in democracy. And I agree. Sadly, but I agree. We need to strengthen local media to where they are meaningful. I'm not as worried about the New York Times, or the Washington Post, or the Wall Street Journal, or the networks. They've got resources to address this that local media may not always have. A former CNN colleague, Louise Schiavone, only half joking years ago, used to say that what we should do is start every story by saying, get a load of this. And end each one with, can you believe it? I think we need to explain ourselves better. The New York Times recently started a feature called Inside the Times, the story behind the story. Anybody caught that? It's on page 2 of the printed edition every day, and you can also subscribe to it online. And what it does, John Herman wrote recently about the land of what he called internet subcultures, which is the beat that he covers. The internet, he said, is so vast that for many of us, it's terra incognita. We don't know what all is out there. One user's home platform is another's foreign country. The customs and mores differ from platform to platform. Some are democracies, some are quasi-dictatorships. Not everyone is on Twitter or Facebook. I don't like Facebook either. Okay. Personally, I'm not interested in sharing all that much of my world with the rest of the world. I text and FaceTime with my grandchildren. Yes, I use Twitter. I need to understand how it works and what its influence has been. But I can do without cute cats, adorable puppies, and what you had for dinner, thank you. It's just me. However, as journalists, we need to master today's social media. And we need to get ready for tomorrow's, to engage our audience and lead its members back to meaningful reporting. Lastly, I believe that there can be fair mix of straight reporting, analysis, and even advocacy, provided we label it clearly and everyone knows what is what. Senator Chuck Grassley, the long-serving Iowa Republican, says he doesn't think there is such a thing as fake news. Bless you, Senator. I think it's an oxymoron. If it's fake, it's not news. If it's news, it had better not be fake. Two journalistic friends and colleagues, Bill Kovach and Tom Rosenstiel, have written a couple of books about the principles of journalism. Bill and Tom say this: the media do not tell you what to think, but from time to time, we do try and tell you what you might want to think about. And I'm deeply disturbed by the level of discourse. I covered the White House during the administrations of Reagan and Bush 41. I've covered political campaigns for decades and around the world. Politicians and the press may disagree on many things, but I've felt until this past year there was at least a grudging respect for the roles that each of us play. That's changed. There's little to suggest that there's much media respect for President Trump, and certainly nothing to suggest President Trump has much respect for the media. Do the two use each other? Absolutely. That's always been the case. Another old journalistic aphorism said, never pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel, meaning the press. Today, we might look at that differently and put it in terms of be careful picking a fight with someone who tweets a firestorm while you're sleeping. Advice to the media, don't get caught sleeping. There's much to be watchful for and much to be wary of, but we need journalistic vigilance, maybe more than we need some self-described pack of vigilantes. It's a challenging time, and I think all of us who are in it would like to think we're up to that challenge, no matter how tough it may be. Thank you very much.
Hey, Charles. As our panelists are coming up here, I want to remind you that you can text your questions to the number on the back of your program. And our Riley Institute Advanced team will be bringing me those questions as we get started. And you will notice we have an addition to our panel besides our three speakers. Many of you will recognize Nigel Robertson. He is an anchor and Emmy award-winning
Thank you.
reporter at WYFF News 4 here in Greenville. Nigel's worked at Channel 4 for nearly 18 years, where he has persistently advocated, much to my delight, for more reporting on politics and policy. So Nigel, I'm going to start with you and pick up where Charles left off, which is local media. He is not the first person in this series to suggest that local news media have an important role to play in helping citizens through this information in the era of fake news. How can local media help us navigate the news, learn about politics, and engage in issues from more trustworthy sources? How can they help restore trust in journalism?
Thank you very much for having me. And I have to say that I've been at WYFF4 for 18 years because it is a newsroom that loves this community. And this community and Western North Carolina, the upstate, and our viewing area in Georgia, we cover as best we can day in and day out. And I have been here because I believe in the importance of the local school board. I believe in the importance of the county councils. I believe holding our governor accountable, whoever our governor is. I have called this area home. My kids are in the public school system. My wife is a public school teacher. I go to the church up the road. I am part of this community. And as one of many, I respect the responsibility that I have to bring the news fair to the people. And I've done it for years. Year after year after year, I've done that. You were with me as I got married and sent me congratulations. You were there when each of my children were born, and random people knitted blankets for my kids. You were there when my father passed away from ALS, and I got thousands of cards and support. Then in 2008, things changed a little bit. I remember I was at a store, the store will remain nameless, and I got out of the car, I was going grocery shopping. And this truck pulls up, and two guys jump out of the truck, and they start screaming racial things towards me. I was obviously concerned for my safety. Thankfully, I was by myself, meaning my family wasn't with me. But they were screaming so much at me, in my mind, it was just kind of a blur. But I remember them saying that I was called an Obama lover. And I got to thinking, this is a attack on me, not because I'm a journalist, but because of the color of my skin. And thankfully, random people in the parking lot walked up to me and said, "We love your work. They were drowning out what these people were saying. And that support and that love was there from the few people that came up and kind of shielded me from that. Social media began to grow. And all of a sudden, any political story that I would post would get attacked. No matter when I was talking about local issues, it didn't happen. But when we were reporting on, when I got 2 sit-down interviews with Hillary Clinton, I was assigned to the Democrats. We had another reporter assigned to the Republicans. With so many Republican candidates, it was just hard to cover it all with just 2 people. So anytime I posted something, I was not being fair. And I didn't think that was fair to me, because I have dedicated day in and day out to bring the news to the viewers here locally and to love this community. And all of a sudden, something started changing. Is it the growth of social media? Is it the growth of news that is slanted? Is it the growth of network television, where if this is how you feel, you could watch this channel, and if this is how you feel, you could watch that channel? What is it? I don't know. But I do think local news is a place where it can be fixed. Why? Because I'm one of you. We shop at the same stores. We eat at the same restaurants. We're in the same community, and you invite me into your home every single day. And it's that relationship that I hope holds, because I would be terrified to be in a world where someone was not holding the police chief accountable. Someone was not holding the sheriff accountable. Someone was not holding lawmakers across the spectrum accountable. Just think of how terrifying that would be. And I think local news is where the community can demand it and get it and respect, and can only grow from there.
You mentioned social media, and I want to throw this out, and Alexis, you may be the person to start this. Anybody else who wants to can jump in on this, though. We often view social media as contributing to the problem of fake news, the spread of misinformation, and even the partisan polarization that we see today. But is there a way for social media to help solve the problems?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be here without social media, right? The fact-checking organization that a group of friends of mine and I launched in Italy, eventually ending up in Rai 2, the national broadcaster, did not have a media home because there was no media interested in doing that kind of work, right? And so our only way to reach an audience was through social media. As with any channel, as with any medium, it is neutral to what humans do to it. But, of course, we need to be extremely literate in how the news system works, right? So when we realized, as we did towards the first half and second half of last year, that entirely fabricated stories could ride the newsfeed algorithm and reach much larger audiences than real stories, then we should be demanding that the algorithm, that black box, be opened up, that there be more accountability from platforms that are so central to our capacity to be informed. The other thing I'd say is, through Facebook is a great tool for fact checkers to find out what people are seeing, right? We couldn't search pamphlets or check out what your crazy relative was sending you via email 20 years ago, right? There are tools to see what is trending on Facebook, and from that, learn what the audiences actually need to know whether it's true or false, and not have to lean on the decision-making processes of the newsroom. So I think, big challenges, and they're true of all our media. We need to be very literate in them, but there's just, I get so frustrated when we just explain away and put a big black mark on everything and all the power that social media allows us.
And I will say it's important too, because So many people can delete their Facebook page, but there's a generation of people that will not do that because that is their main means of communication. And for my kids and anyone 30, 20, and in their teens, that is the way they communicate day in and day out. They sit there Snapchatting each other or posting pictures to Instagram. That is how that generation not only communicates with each other, but consumes news as well. So it is a responsibility for all of us to fix this, I think, if we want to protect these future generations. And social media is vitally important because it's not going anywhere, because a lot of people are making a lot of money off of it.
So I think we're talking about fake news or misinformation that's spread, right? We have to remember that fake news is not new. It's been, since the printed word, right, and before, rumors, right, gossip. But I think the thing that we also need to remember too is that it's, getting information from social media is a little bit like capitalism. So if the demand's not there, it's going to go away. And it's going to take us a little while as a society to kind of settle down and to figure out what those practices are. Like, it's going to take a while for people to learn what's fake and what's not. It's just, we have to adapt to this medium just as we have to radio or to television, or even to the printed word.
Can I jump in? Just because Nigel mentioned Snapchat and because it ties into this idea of demand, right? Snapchat has recently said that it will have journalists fact check stories that it will choose to highlight, right? This was a couple of weeks ago with Charlottesville. I think they started doing it a lot, and with Houston. So as media consumers, then we should be sort of going towards, if we really do think that accuracy matters, we should be going towards the platforms that also believe that accuracy matters.
Yeah, that's the part that I forgot, is that there is an effort behind the scenes to kind of correct what we see as imperfections in the system. So the latest round of Knight grants, the name escapes me, but focused on what to do about fake news and misinformation. So people are looking at solutions to flagging sites or verifying sites or all these little technological things that we can't think of right now that will help us along the way.
The whole premise that there is bad information out there somewhere, whether by intent or by accident, or that politicians are calling each other bad names, is hardly new. It's the proliferation, it's the ubiquity, it's the ease of technology, putting it all, every one of us has got one of these things in our pockets, I would venture to say. If there are 6 of you out there who don't, I would be surprised. And put, we're now debating at what age do we give our children a phone? Partly because we want to know, are they safe? And yet conversely, are we making them more unsafe by giving them a phone? But they're out there. You cannot ignore the reality that everybody's got one, and they're using it for a variety of purposes. And so the opportunities for things to go bad are just increased that much, for bad information to proliferate and to be repeated and repeated and repeated until it starts to take on a life of its own.
I want to back up to a couple of questions that we got last week that I think you folks may be in a better position to answer than we could last week. And there have been several questions in the last 2 weeks along this theme, but this one comes from Kathy. She says, as an average citizen, I'm having difficulty distinguishing facts from alternative facts and judging the significance of various issues, some of which are either overblown or glossed over. Any advice for her? Any practical advice for how we distinguish facts from all the other stuff?
I would say, for so long we had one place where we turned to get our news. When you came home from work, you put on whatever channel your mom watched, your dad watched, and you sat down. When I was at 6 o'clock, from 7 o'clock, that's when I got the news, if I was only getting it from TV. Then it became 5. Then it became 4. And then the mornings. And now on every network, 15 networks in the upper levels of the channel spectrum. Now it's on their phone. Now it's on social media. And I think if we go back to the simplicity of that one source of information, think of how trusted information, think of how simple it could be. I mean, we pull out our phone, it makes us anxious, nervous, angry, happy. All these emotions go with this little device that comes in our pocket. You know what I mean?
I've lived in that country with only one source of information.
well,
I don't want to go back to that.
I don't mean one source of information out there. I mean, you find that place where you have gotten that trusted news for so long, where nothing has changed, and continue that. So many people are collecting information that is not verified, not true, but it may lean to their beliefs, and then they don't question it, and then they don't do the homework to check the facts on it, and it just creates a spiral of.
My counsel to students and you at large is do not rely on one source with which you are comfortable. I respectfully disagree. If you hear something on Fox, go to CNN. If you hear something on MSNBC, go to someplace else. Read the New York Times. If you're relying on one source of information, whatever that source may be, you're doing yourself a disservice because you're only getting part of the picture. So facts without context are basically useless.
Yeah, we teach a couple simple things. And one of the first things that you can do is do a gut check. So if you are reading something, and the alternative facts thing has kind of raised a flag for me. So if you're reading something that has stirred a reaction in you, some kind of extreme reaction, nervousness, anger, excitement, that kind of thing, step back and say, why am I reacting to this? And then it's going to take some work. It's not always easy. So you will have to go back and look at the story, whatever it is that you're reading, and do some homework. So look to see if there's a byline, and look to see if that person has written anything else. Look at the headlines to see if there are, flag words or, whatever. I can't think of the word for those right, but something inflammatory, right? Look at the publication, and look at the about section of the publication, and look for those kinds of things that are going to sort of connect all of dots for you. If some of that information is missing, then there's probably a problem with whatever you're reading.
They really fly so much lower with one simple hack. How many of you know how to reverse image search? Any hands? Okay.
Reverse image.
Reverse search an image. Now, I saw a couple of hands. Excellent. For all the rest of you, if you're on Chrome, right-click an image, and it will show you any previous instances of that image. If you're not on Chrome, go on sites like TinEye. Save the image and then upload it on Google Images. It will give you all prior or similar instances of that image. This seems like silly, but when tomorrow or the day after tomorrow you'll see that devastating image of Irma from right now, right here, Florida, and you can reverse image search it and see that it's been around the internet for 2, 3, 4, 10 years, then you can for sure tell that it's not an image from right now here, Florida. It's small, but usually the Achilles heel of fake news is the multimedia that accompany it.
I told you you'd get answers tonight, didn't I? All right. Another question that I think was sort of the next step on that last question, and this one came from Laura, and her comment was, for most Americans, they're searching for real news regarding our political situation, but how do those folks engage with others who are simply amused by fake news and content to, she says, wallow in their ignorance? I don't blame that one on me, please. How can folks who do recognize the importance of facts and making sure that the information you're taking in and sharing is real, how do you convey that seriousness? How do you have conversations with those folks that are content to not distinguish between facts and non-fact?
Just a few days ago, a study came out, and it's quite along the lines of other literature in this space. Engage, okay? Because the study that was published, I think University of California, San Diego, found that when someone you know, a friend, corrects you on social media, this was on Twitter, you are more likely to accept that correction than if a stranger does, okay? It was about twice as likely. The problem with corrections is that we feel threatened, okay? That you feel like your worldview is under attack, that you feel that you're being called dumb, right? So think at ways in which you avoid and go around that. Make it clear that you're not attacking the person. You are playing the ball, not the man. This has been shown to be more effective. You know, you're also not going to convince everyone, and that's also fine. And at a certain point, maybe make new friends.
Okay, that's your advice. Go make new friends. That's good.
So the first thing more, huh?
That's good. Okay, a couple of related questions here, getting at how have various kinds of media contributed to the partisan polarization that I think makes our acceptance of some of this misinformation much more likely. To what extent has fake news in the digital era contributed to partisan polarization, and tied to that, what's been the impact of 24-hour news?
I feel like I should answer that, having
You were in that on the early stages,
spent
right?
20 years in 24-hour news, actually more than that. It's okay to disagree on things. It's okay to have differing perspectives. It's okay to be Republicans and Democrats and liberals and conservatives and to have that kind of conversation. It's okay to have a conversation with your brother-in-law at Thanksgiving, even though you know it may be a delicate conversation. But we should feel that the opportunity that we have to engage is in and of itself a plus in the conversation, that we are not locked into some sort of autocratic approach to the media, that it's this way and only this way. But to the question of how has 24-hour news and how have the media contributed to this, I think the contribution is simply because there is so much more information accessible to us. And that comfortable time was when you had a morning newspaper and an afternoon newspaper, and the news was only 15 minutes at 6:30, so it wasn't as much stuff to argue over as there is now. And the nature of 24-hour news, or 24/7, or 24/7, 365, if you amplify it, is that there are periods of time when there's not a whole lot going on. And because I'm a television network, I want to retain all of you as viewers. I don't want you to jump over and see what's happening on WYFF at the moment. Wait till Nigel comes on later. So I've got to give you something to chew on. And that's where we get into these extensive panels, much more so than even ours, or the sort of celebrity squares of television, where you've got one expert from each slice of the political spectrum in a box, and they spend half an hour largely debating. I love Morning Joe. Morning Joe wakes me up in the morning. I think it's good discussion. It tilts, of course it tilts. But I know a lot of those people, and one of those is Josh Dawsey, who I mentioned, and another one is another former student of mine. So I engage perhaps differently than the public at large does, but what we're presented with is a commercial organization, for the most part, leaving public television aside in this, that wants to hold an audience, and so it's going to keep throwing stuff at you, because television to some degree is like Cyclops. It has one eye in the middle of its forehead. That's that camera lens, and if it's focused on you, it is riveted on you to the exclusion of everything else. But if something else gets my attention, Cyclops is gone, and so it's holding your attention, and we just bombard you with expert after expert after presumed expert, and a lot of discussion. And so that's, I mean, there's a guilt element to that, but what the heck? We want you to stick around. Something will happen in the next hour and we'll move on to.
But that goes back to what I was saying before. For generations, we had our local news, or we had that source of news, and this was not a problem. Now suddenly, in this age we live in, with information coming at all these places and people just wanting us to stay around so they can, sell information and so on, we see a growing problem forming. And that goes back to what I was saying before. I mean, for years people trusted me, and now all of a sudden they don't. Some don't. Why? I haven't changed. So where is that distrust? What is creating that distrust and festering it and has it growing? Is it the public? Is it the news? Or is it something else?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we know, for example, that fake news is often produced by a machine. So we do know purveyors of fake news are paid, from Macedonia to flood our social media channels. We've just seen what has been going on with Facebook, and you and I talked about this earlier. Russians purchasing ads through Facebook, political ads through Facebook. We don't know to what degree that it certainly didn't create the partisanship, but we do know that it fanned the flames of it. And we're learning about what to do. I mean, these are questions that are going to change how we think about privacy, how we think about the First Amendment, how we think about who a publisher is. But one of the underlying concepts that we have to keep in mind is that we're not passive, we're active. So the power is in our hands to decide whether to believe them or to do the legwork, right, the dirty work to figure out, is this true or not?
I want to follow up on this question a little bit because it does bring up the partisan polarization question. And so much of what we find is that people are talking past each other. They're yelling at each other. They're not always yelling about the same things. And they're not really hearing what the other one's yelling. Is there a role for media, local or national, to get people to engage with each other? I think we sometimes think of news as just sort of sending information at us, but I know with you, you've been more active on social media in your role with YFF. Are there ways that local media or national media can get people to engage with each other and listen to, or at least hear, differing viewpoints as opposed to simply letting them yell at each other on air?
It's hard, and here's why. People will sit at their computer and type something and hit enter, close their computer and go to bed. And what they typed is not something they would ever say to that person face to face. And then when they wake up and they see the comments, they're like, what have I done? But it's out there. So it's tough.
I do think that social media create that forum. Logistically, we can't put 600 people on stage. Or we could sit here all night and just talk about this and have an engaging conversation with a variety of opinions. But the media are not set up for a constant exchange over a broad number of people. Our role is to deliver you information for you to talk about among yourselves and arrive at some conclusion or not. That's not as important as just the fact that you're discussing it and that you're becoming part of that dialogue. And it does happen on social media, and it does happen when an organization like this one brings a group of people together to talk, or as public television sometimes does with a round table and a forum. So I think if we're kickstarting the conversation, that's good, and that's the role we can play.
So I'm speaking as a reporter, a former reporter, not on behalf of NLP, but I can tell you that it was so hard for me and for others I know to let go of that gatekeeping role that we all had at one time as journalists. And it scares the heck out of reporters, thinking that they're not in control of the news, because we're taught that we know what the truth is, right? That we know what you want to know. The truth is that we don't know what you want to know, and you guys often have much better ideas. or have good ideas that we really need to listen to. So I do think, and this is changing a little bit, that it requires an attitude change on behalf of newsmakers. I do think that we can start thinking, we as news organizations can start thinking in new ways to engage in the community, because it is a two-way street. You know, social media, by definition, is social. It's a conversation. So we have to figure that part of it out. But I will say too, again, there are some efforts, mostly in niche markets and then with local markets. There are efforts, for example, by API, to do community roundtables so that we can bring newsmakers, news gatherers, news reporters, and the community together to talk about the issues that are important to them.
This.
Alexius, I'm going to start with you on this question, but others of you may want to jump in here given your reporting backgrounds. Alan's asking, what's happened to the two sources component of the news? It appears that more and more news that is breaking news is put out before it is fact-checked. And adding to that, I'm going to throw in my own question, which is, what are you seeing in terms of developments of real-time fact-checking? We've seen a little bit of this past election cycle with debates or speeches. What are the standards now for what is good fact-checking, either before the story goes out or after the story's out there?
Yeah, I mean, so other speakers have touched upon this, but journalism costs of this variety, right? So the first, or among the first jobs to be lost in many newsrooms were the fact checkers. And then even the copy editors, further closer to the copy. So if this matters to you, patronize and subscribe to magazines that have big fact-checking departments. I'm thinking The New Yorker, I'm thinking National Geographic, whatever your choice of news or information is. In terms of real-time fact-checking, I think there are two different things. First, I think we are seeing an effort at the media, we are also, as consumers, expecting to be told exactly what's going on at all times immediately. And hey, the other guy told me something before, I'm bored of you. And so what we've seen is a better explanation to readers and viewers and audiences of what we do and don't know, right? One of the best things for me has been to see the box on NPR online with breaking news blog that says, this is a breaking news situation. We may get things wrong. We are trying to corroborate things as we go. We will make our damn best to update and correct as we go. So I think our corrective in 2017, our self-corrective role ex post is probably the most important thing, absolutely. I am also seeing, because of the power of structuring facts and previous fact checks, gradually in the next 5 to 10 years, a capacity to more rapidly surface things that have already been fact-checked or facts that we may need rapidly.
At WYFF, I let you inside how we do this. It's a beautiful thing, I think, is we're really not allowed to use sources. And if we...
What do you mean by that?
So...
Why do you interview me?
Well, because I interview you and I put you on camera.
Oh, okay.
All right. So for me to use unnamed sources, I would have to go through a lot of reasons why I can't say who said. So we have to not only verify it once, not twice, but 3 times and sometimes 4 times, depending on who number 1 and number 2 was. And if someone's telling me the sky is blue, not only do I have to show you that the sky is blue, but I also have to interview you telling me the sky is blue. So it, in many ways, covers our tracks, and we have to do that with every single story that we, as reporters at WYFF, put on there. And that is because, and that's why I've stayed here for so long, because I love journalism. And it is true journalism at its finest, I think, because we cannot just go with he said, she said.
Many news organizations will not permit you to use anonymous sources for the obvious reason is we constitutional right to confront our accusers to some degree. And other organizations will say, well, what are the circumstances that require you to at least raise the prospect of using an anonymous source? And you can think of several of those. It could be a whistleblower who is letting you in on the fact that the government is spending money foolishly, or something worse than that. And so whistleblowers are protected under the law. And if the substance is significant enough, you will take that information as a journalist, and you will go and try and corroborate it somewhere else. So the single source rule generally only applies to when it comes from the horse's mouth. If I'm in the White House, as I was, and I run into the president, which doesn't happen very often, and he says, I'm going to start bombing North Korea tomorrow. Ronald Reagan once said the bombing begins in 5 minutes, but he was joking. And then I'm pretty much on my own able to go out and say, I just ran into the president. He says he's going to begin bombing tomorrow. That's the sole authoritative source. But if I run into the chief of staff and he says, just want to let you in on something, the president's going to announce that the bombing is going to start tomorrow, I want another source on that, because I don't know what he's feeding me or why, whether it's legitimate or whether he wants a trial balloon out there to see what the reaction is from Pyongyang or elsewhere. So you other than a primary top of the ladder source, you want a second or more corroborating sources. And if it's going to be anonymous, there has got to be an extremely good reason why you're protecting someone from saying whatever it is that they are saying. And it may be that you're protecting them. You could be even protecting their life. But you've got to have good arguable reasons for doing so. And news organizations have whole cadres of people who want to check this sort of thing before it gets on the air or in print.
Summer has asked a question. She initially targeted at Charles and Nigel. I'm going to actually expand it to all of you because you've all done media-related jobs at some point. Can you talk about an example from your career when you had to make a tough judgment call between what might be false information or truth when you were unsure? They all look at the ceiling.
So, yes, I got a tip, I forget what year it was, that Governor Stanford had been MIA for a while.
I remember that
Yes.
tip.
So I started kind of looking into it and calling my contacts, and I was told that he was not where he said he was, but I didn't know where he was. And I'm a journalist in Greenville, and my phone's ringing off the hook, and people are telling me this, but I didn't tell you this, that kind of stuff. And I went into the boss's office, and I remember sitting down and saying, I don't think the governor is where he says he is, and this is why. And these are who are telling me this information. But I couldn't, it turns out I was right, but I couldn't run with that information. And we warred with it, and for a couple days, trying to figure out how we could confirm, because no one knew where he was. Eventually, we were able to. He was spotted at the airport in Atlanta, and that opened the door to us covering things. But I remember that was huge for me and the state of South Carolina. But you couldn't get that one wrong.
Yeah, I had to think about it a little bit. So I used to cover education for the Orlando Sentinel. I'm trying. Sorry. All right. So for the Orlando Sentinel, and the school district at the time had a $2.2 billion construction project that was designed to rebuild schools that had traditionally served low-income African American communities. And it turned out that some of the internal district employees and some of the contractors were monkeying with the contracts in order to make more money, and they were blaming the dwindling resources on the construction crash that happened, the China construction crash that happened in whatever year that was, 2005 or 2006. And I had a source, I had a single source who didn't like it and he thought it was wrong, and he was feeding me information. And that was one of, we had documents, we had his word, we had some evidence here and there, but we agonized over that for a little bit until we started to see that these things were true.
Mine's a little bit different. It's a story that we didn't do. I was covering the Pentagon for CNN in the early years of the Reagan administration, and it was at a time when there was development of the you may recall the MX, later called the Peacemaker missile, a multi-stage intercontinental ballistic missile. And the big question was, where was this going to be deployed? At that time, during the Cold War, with the standoff between the US and the Soviet Union, that seemed to matter a lot. And to the places where the missile was going to be deployed, it would mean millions of dollars into communities and jobs and things of that sort. And over a period of a week or two, we knew that the announcement was coming up, and other people were reporting the Peacekeeper missile is going to be deployed in, I think it was Montana, something of that sort. And these stories kept coming up, and I couldn't confirm the story. And I had one contact at the Pentagon whom I trusted greatly, was a naval officer in the Office of Naval Information. And he would tell me, Charles, I don't know where it's going, but I wouldn't run with that story. And I just could not confirm it, which is very frustrating for a journalist when the Washington Post is reporting and NBC is reporting, and your temptation is to stand out in front of the Pentagon one morning and say, well, people around here are murmuring that it's going to Montana. Which would have been unfair because I hadn't reported it. And it turned out the morning that it was announced, it went to North Dakota, shall we say. And the struggle was wanting to be able to say, yeah, I know where it's going, and not being able to.
I think we've got time for one more question here. I'm going to throw it open to all of you. It's been asked, actually it was asked last week as well. Eric, I think we'll start with you though, because I know you directly deal with this. How can we get young people more engaged with following the news?
So the interesting part of that is that they actually are following news, but they don't realize it. So studies are showing that kids in that age get their news and information from much more nuanced ways. Largely it's word of mouth, and that's based on what they have seen or heard on Facebook or social media. They're also picking it up from their parents, because they do listen to their parents, and from whatever might be streaming in the background. With that said, one of the challenges, though, is to help to make that connection that the local news affects these kids' lives, and that they have a voice in what they're saying, and that requires talking to your I don't say your students, or talking to your kids, or telling them to read the newspaper. And I have a little bit of an anecdote, and I'll try to make it quick about that. So we work we at NLP, not me as a reporter, we at NLP work with a all-boys Catholic school on the south side of Chicago. It's called Leo Catholic High School, and we worked with a teacher who taught, I think it was a journalism class, but he used our lessons as part of that too. He had a student named Christian Armstrong who grew up on O Block, and O Block is statistically the most dangerous block in the city of Chicago. I think it still is. I know it was at the time. And he grew up. He admitted that his brother ran with gangs, but he dreamed of being, I think it was a rap star. And his mom and his grandma wanted something different for him, so they kept Christian inside. And one of the effects of that was, Christian was watching life around him, and he felt like he did not have a voice. He was like, nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to change. I don't know, right? So he took this class, went through our news literacy course, and he was required to read the newspaper and required to talk about it. And this is at the time when the Laquan McDonald stuff was going on. And so Christian started to make that connection. He's like, I see this on my streets all the time. This is what's being reported about it. I don't like it. And from that, he started to come. He was a very shy boy, and he started to come out of his shell. And he started to join, like Black Lives Matter movements, and started to think about what having a voice meant. And so when he and I talked at the time, he thought he might want to become a writer or a blogger of some kind, because he realized that the news, the stuff that he's hearing around him, actually mattered.
Yeah, I think the youth are engaged, and I totally agree with what she said. But they're just not engaged in the way the generations before them have been. If it is an issue that is passionate to them, I will go to a council meeting and there will be so many young people there. Or I'll go downtown Greenville where there's a march or something and there's so many young people there. But they are engaged, and it's figuring out how, I mean, those text alerts that probably a lot of us get on our phones, for many young people, that's enough for them. They don't have to click it. They've got a little bit of what's going on. But I do think they are engaged. I just think they express themselves differently than generations before.
Any final comments or final piece of advice you would like to give to our audience?
I want to thank each and every one of you for not just being here, but allowing us into your home and trusting us to bring you the news. It is, we're all in this together. Whether we agree or not, we are all in this together. And together, nothing can stop us.
I would simply say Dovriai no Provriai. Trust but verify.
That seems to me a very good place to end this series. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate your interest, and I am excited about the conversations that I have been hearing as a result of you walking out of here and telling other people about what you have learned here. Thank you very much to the Riley Institute and to the folks at Ollie for co-sponsoring this, and thank you again this evening to our panel. Have a good evening.